if we can't get the entire tongue up on the palate, it's like I can't keep my head over my midline. It's going to alter my vision, my hearing, an extension of our brain. And it built all this code based off of where we thought neutral used to be, and now neutral has shifted. And I think our brain is like, what are you doing?
So I want to introduce you to this program. It's called Tales of Transformation. So it's not necessarily like a dental or medical podcast or anything like that. It's me interviewing people who I think are doing things completely differently. So who are breaking the mold, who are living just outside of the status quo, who are questioning things, who are asking why we're doing the things the way we're doing them, and asking whether it works. And if it doesn't, they're forging a new path. And I want to have conversations with people and ask them why. How did you find the courage to do this? What took you on this path? What have you learned along the way? So that other people can have permission slips to do the same. Because I think most of the world is like, the rules and the protocols and government and, all the institutions tell me to do A, B, C, and I do that until I retire and then I die. And I'm like, I think we can up level in health, in abundance, in family, in the way we raise our children, the way we educate our kids, the way we eat, the way we sleep, the way we connect with God or universal, whatever you want to believe in. Like, I believe that everything has this original blueprint and we're living like way off it. And I wonder where the path is back to it. So that's kind of the Tales of
Yeah, yeah,
Transformation mission.
I
Um,
like it.
so now I have you on to explore your journey. So I guess I want to start by asking, like, what is it that you do? What are your qualifications? What's your educational or training background? And how did you find yourself doing this Project Airway?
So I went to school. I was actually an electrical engineer, like was always good, math, science. And then got through my junior year in college, just didn't really love it. And I had played sports my whole life, got into lifting weights my freshman year in college, and just realized that like I love fitness and health. And not having sports as an adult, I was like, how the hell am I going to fill this void in my life? And then it was kind of something where I got into fitness. So me and my best friend have had our own gym for 15 years now. I've been training for 25. So having been in health and fitness, for most of my career, and then realizing about probably 17, 18 years ago, I started to deal with some health stuff and kind of navigating everything from traditional Western medicine. And then for myself, just kind of trying to go down every wormhole, Eastern medicine, just being open to what exists and how, I could just try to help myself in as many ways possible. And then that's when kind of the whole airway side to things really showed up in my life about 5 years ago. And then that's when I just did everything I could to learn as much as possible. And little by little, just I think a passion was lit inside me. And it was more a curiosity. I think part of it started as a way to help myself. And then it became this whole thing where it's like, okay, like there's so many people out there suffering with this. Why the hell is it happening? Why aren't we doing something to prevent it from happening? And then I woke up today.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. So why is this happening and why are we not doing something to prevent this from happening? I think that goes back to childhood and, even very small children, very small babies, and our jaw development. What would you say? Would you say that is an aspect to it, or if that is all of it? And if so, what do you think are the impacts, or the influences on our limited jaw development that is everywhere?
I think it's like these 87 things that started occurring thousands of years ago. And I think in some things, right, like back in the day, you could do a lot of things wrong and still be okay because genetics were in our side. And then I feel like now parents almost need to do it's the opposite. You have to get it almost all right. And you don't have much room for error because of all these things that have added up that we no longer have in our favor. And it's like, I think as we've evolved as a species, I think we get further and further away from being human at the cost of technology and a lot of these things that give us access to a different life than we've had for most of primitive man's life. And because of that, I think all these things from food quality, just oxygen, all these different things. We've just had all these degradations over generations, and they've just finally added up. And then we almost need all these interventions just to bring us to a baseline and function in a modern world because we don't get it right in so many ways, coupled with the epigenetic response from the last few hundred years. And I feel like it's generations of just not getting the right nutrients. So we don't have optimal building blocks. We don't get the stimulus of chewing to develop. So it's kind of like our DNA has this perfect blueprint for how we develop. The teeth size and the tongue size is already predetermined. The only thing that's required is the work to show up to ensure that everything fits. Only it's not, and we've known that. And because we can't go in real time and edit the DNA to say, well, hey, let's make the teeth smaller, the tongue smaller, because it's not going to fit because the work's not going to be there. But we don't have access to that. And then as a result, we're left kind of trying to play cleanup with not enough real estate and too many pieces to the puzzle. And then, yeah, we've just kind of gotten here.
Mm. So let's say someone comes to you with a newborn baby today, like
Mm-hmm.
literally give birth, and they're like, I want to make sure my baby is given the best chance of their jaw developing as much as I can, as much as I humanly can with the resources that we have available to us. What are like the 5 tips you would give them?
I guess first thing would be like educating them to really understand like how to proactively maximize things because it's all the little things that go with the tips that I would give, but I would
Mhm.
say um a mom literally just getting optimal nutrients
Yeah.
to ensure baby kind of on board is getting like the best. I think secondary is nervous system to the mother and the environment that the child is raised in is huge.
Mm.
I think breastfeeding and ensuring a child stays nasal breathing for as long as possible is the most critical thing. And then I would say just when you started to wean a child onto normal food is not giving a child mush or slop, just basically challenging the jaw and the teeth and the stimulus of chewing as much as possible, I think is huge. And then I would say probably just things that you could add stimulus to a child's life, like even a newborn mom understanding that, like, making noises or different stuff that mimic like myofunctional type exercises that almost like teach children these tools early on that are going to just give a child more of maybe what they would have had organically a few thousand years ago, but we just don't get. It's kind of like we create man-made is like exercise, right? We created this thing because we used to just be outside all the time and we worked physically. And now it's like we need this made up thing to show up and be more human. And I think it's like the same when it comes to like chewing and all this stuff. So it's like getting kids to just do some of this stuff that will mimic maybe more of the chewing or things that we used to do hundreds of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love the encouragement to, and I know like it's difficult depending on the mother and the situation, etc. And I definitely don't want to make anyone feel bad, but I think the breastfeeding one is so key, and to support mothers in breastfeeding for as long as possible. One of my colleagues actually said that she was told that after 6 months, breast milk has no benefit and that just to stop. And I was like, what? I literally, and that was her doctor that told her that. Now, I'm sure not all doctors are saying that, but if that is an example of the education that patients are getting, then I think we're all in a little bit of trouble, really.
Yeah.
That is, I was quite shocked. And she brought that on, she took that on and she was like, it's science. Breast milk is not beneficial after 6 months. I was like, that is absolutely not true at all. Am I right
You
to
know
assume?
what's interesting? I forget her name. I watched a podcast probably a few months ago. So one of the most interesting things I think she talked about was that like 90% of breast milk has the bifidobacteria in it. So what that is it's almost like this internal training tool for babies. So it's like their gut bacteria starts to recognize good and bad bacteria.
Okay.
And by breastfeeding, like, because for myself, I never was, and I've had gut issues my whole life. And it was interesting to see. It's almost like this training tool to teach, even like from a gut health perspective, the body how to recognize good and bad and how it's like I feel like nature has all these back end training tools that we can't hack them in life. And I think you take all these basically primitive reflexes and all these different tools, and it's like if we miss out on them, it's like we often get held back in these ways that we're unaware. And I think
That is
that's
a
so important.
that is a really good point. And what that makes me think of is maybe the birthing system too, and how there's interventions in the birthing process. And so maybe some women are having C-sections where in a different situation or circumstances, it may have been completely safe for them to deliver. And so getting the right pressures on the skull as the baby exits, and also the vaginal microbiome, the baby is swallowing all that stuff and that's seeding their gut. So yeah, maybe the education needs to go all the way back to like supporting women and saying you can do this, and these are the techniques of how you're going to support your baby and your body to be able to deliver this baby the way that you probably want to. And again, not shaming, not saying that there aren't situations where C-sections are necessary, because in some cases they are, but just from speaking to a lot of women about this, it sounds like in some cases there are the encouragement to go down the intervention route when maybe the other path could have been taken. And I think that is probably the first place where the child's skull hasn't got the right stimulus, and maybe that's also impacting jaw development. Thoughts? Do you agree, or do you have any other thoughts to add?
Yeah, you know what I was thought is this is a really interesting book. I don't know if you've ever read it with Weston Price.
No, but you
So
know
he's a
what? Like,
famous dentist.
like my two last guests, oh no, the two
Yeah,
guests, so Dr. Seb Lomas, who I believe you've connected with,
yeah, yeah.
and Dr. Jalal Khan have both quoted that book, and it's on the reading list now.
So what's crazy? It's like 100 years ago, right? Here's the guy. I think he had part of it right. He talked about how pretty much there was a time where most of the male children, there was all these basically issues with pregnancy because these women's pelvic floors had gotten smaller. And as a result, they were just not able to have healthy pregnancies. And I think part of him, what he thought was the lack of nutrients And they witnessed this in some of these animals that they had brought into zoos, and basically like these moms not being able to carry the baby or issues. And I think part of them, they thought it was relative to the nutrients that the carrying mom had in the system. And I think one of the other things that I know from what I do for a living is when the jaw doesn't develop and I switch to mouth breathing, the way I manage pressure on my skeleton as I develop as a human is typically altered forever. And that alteration changes the pressure on the pelvic floor, and thus the development of the structure itself is going to change as a result of that. And I found myself thinking like, like this is crazy to think that here's a guy 100 years ago talking about that there's an issue here relative to just it all coming back to a jaw. And then you're thinking modern intervention is like, okay, we need to do these medical births as a result of, all these things just not being treated when it comes back to, let's just say, an airway. And kind of what you said, I think, is very much the case. I talk to people all the time that like they didn't even have issues. A dentist goes and takes out their basically their wisdom teeth. And then now all of a sudden someone has issues and they didn't have them before. So it's not like they were removed just because. And then they just create these issues. And I'm sure there's plenty of people that have wisdom teeth removed because they're impacted. There's a problem, but I think our society is almost like gotten ahead of itself, or there's money to be made. Let's go down this route. And then it's like it creates these issues for people that didn't even have them prior to.
Hmm, yeah. And I think the way wisdom teeth are dealt with, it might be quite different in the US and in the UK. Um, I'm under the understanding that you guys maybe take them out prophylactically, so you just go for it and just have them out. Is that correct?
I literally was coming over my brother's a few weeks ago, and there's a billboard that's like, get your wisdom taken out. And it's like, it's like 250 a tooth. And it's like, let's just get ahead of this.
Yeah, we
I was like,
definitely, yeah, we don't have that here. We have like something called the NICE guidelines, and you have to have some sort of, unrestorable decay, or like they're very impacted. There's a cyst around it, blah blah blah, before you have them out. Um,
got it.
which is a little nicer, I think. Um, However, we're still not asking the question, why is everyone got, not everyone, but most people got impacted wisdom teeth, and where is that coming from? And can we address that right at the root? Which I guess is the conversation that we're having and why we're here. Just asking
Yeah.
the conversation, yeah. So I think I saw in your stories and maybe a post yesterday or today saying that, there is a point where the nasal breathing switches to mouth breathing in young children. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Where that point comes from?
So I would just say, I think it tends to be like either a kid comes out, has good genetics, and then they just kind of get enough of the right stuff and they're good. Or I think in the first few years, I mean, that's when we tend to see, I think a lot of kids just kind of switch over to mouth breathing. And I was just talking about, do you know who Dr. Courtney Donko is?
Oh,
She's a really good pediatric ortho in Chicago. So it was a post she had a few years back, but it really started to kind of hit home relative to what I've been reading. But she basically talked about the ramus development in young children, and going off the top, I think like the from 5 months to 1 year, I think the max growth you can get is like 10 or 11 millimeters. Year two of life is like 6. And then I think it goes to like 3 or 4. Like the fourth year of life is maybe 3. And then after that, you're really not getting that much growth, which told me that the first few years of life, when it comes to having length to basically the arm of our mandible and to get the freedom of our mandible from a joint perspective, it's like we better get that right. And if you have a child in the first few years that switches over to mouth breathing, the forces are not going to be there. Therefore, there's this critical window of 2 to 3 years where it's huge to ensure a child stays nasal breathing, because that's where the joint, the mechanism, all that is going to be developed. And then if a child is robbed of that window, we're never getting it back. And I don't care if you do palate expansion, any of these things, it's like you're not going to be able to add to that arm length of your mandible. The window has been lost. So I think there's all these modern interventions with a palate expansion and all these things to help accommodate, where we missed out as children. But then there's certain things that we'll never get back, and then that will alter our function forever as humans, from a jaw level, from a muscular level. And then it's like we just are left compensating for life. And like it's like getting all these little milestones in a good place for a child early on really sets them up for success. Otherwise, I think we're just constantly left compensating as we age because we missed all these little things along the way. And they're way more important than I think most of us recognize, because we don't really know what our kids not getting because they didn't have that.
That's a good point. Yeah, we don't know, we don't know what our potential is because we've only experienced everyone living beneath that potential. So we don't actually know what we can achieve in terms of appearance, in terms of airway, in terms of symmetry, in terms of function, just the whole mechanics and the biochemistry and everything just together. And then our expression, the person that comes from everything working coherently. I don't think we've had a chance to see that. And maybe that's happening in like an indigenous tribe somewhere. We should go do a Western A Price kind of move and go go explore an adventure, because that's where we're going to see it, right? If anything.
Yeah. I think they'd all be sitting around nasal breathing with their big jaws, and then they'd be like, "Have you heard of this Netflix thing?" And you're like, "Yeah, it's awesome." You can't have it all, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's the thing, because it's the convenience of living in the world, and the just like everything that's available in the world that we're in on this side of that line of, compensating and medicalized baths and not quite getting the right nutrition and all of that stuff, but having Netflix and planes and holidays and nightclubs or whatever it is,
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
the simple life of like you get up with the sun, you do your chores, you go to sleep with the sun, you have loads of babies, and that's, the simple life. And I wonder if there's a balance for some of us that desire it. But in terms of like this switch from nasal to mouth breathing, obviously you kind of touched on like the mum getting the right nutrition, pre-conception, during pregnancy, after birth, having a regulated nervous system, breastfeeding for as long as possible, giving the child some more challenging foods that are going to challenge the jaw and the face to develop. But for those that maybe are already past that phase and are like, oh, my baby's like 1 or 2, there are a few things out there. There's things like Maya Munchie and like children's myofunctional courses and things like that. Do you have any tips for moms who have got children who are a little bit older than, an actual baby that you've come across that you think are quite useful?
Yeah, I think like you said, the Myo tools are awesome. I would say I think the cranial sacral stuff is huge as well. And then, I started shooting a course yesterday. I think it's really important for parents to just ensure their child does not have any limitation from a tongue perspective. And I was talking about, like, there was an article a few months back in the New York Times where it was kind of bashing like just the bastardized tongue tie, like everyone's doing them. They're not really doing what people say they are. And I took that back to what I do for a living, being that like there's like a minimum functional requirement from like a tongue perspective. And it does a lot of different things from a development perspective. So even from like reflexes, switching from like an infantile swallow to an adult smile. And if we don't have that, if we can't get the entire tongue up on the palate, it's like I can't keep my head over my midline. If I can't seal my palate and I'm a child, it's going to alter my vision, my hearing. So all these things matter relative to like a tongue function. So for parents, I think it's like ensuring your kids are checked for these things that you're not qualified to even have an opinion on because you're like, what? I don't even know why this matters. But just to ensure that your kid has these minimum thresholds to where they're not going to be held back functionally from a development perspective. Yeah. So I think Stephen Lynn does a really good job about this too, is when kids start to get slightly older is, we talk about protecting nasal breathing. I think especially with kids that are outside environmentally is just making sure kids even just cleaning out their nose prior to bed. I think that can be important too, just from a nasal rinse, neti pot, whatever parents are using. And I think like I've seen a few moms that are dentists, orthos do a really good job with this. I know Dr. Courtney, the same. Um, is that just making it fun? Like kids want to be a part of adults' lives. And I think part of this starts with the parents living the message that they're preaching to their kids and then setting the habits for young kids. So I think one, like kids are smarter than we give them credit for. So talking them about how and why things are important. I see this all the time, even with little kids in my gym, just doing active every day, like kids seeing that. And I think, if you have a nighttime process with, even for a mom, dad, that's like, I'm going to put on mouth tape or I'm going to do like a nasal rinse is like kids want to do it with you. And if you make it fun and you do it consistently, you're setting these habits for these young kids for life. And I think that's like a huge part of this as well. Like living the message, there's nothing more important than what a kid sees day to day from, all right, this is going to be a part of the rest of my life.
Mm, that is a great point. Like model the behavior that you wish for. They don't do as you say, they do as you do. That whole
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
So modeling that behavior, if you don't want them to eat junk food all day, don't eat junk food all day. Let's not get our children to decay their teeth and require early extractions, which results in crowding because the baby teeth are the space holders, right, for the adult teeth. So if they're having early loss of those baby teeth or they're losing their E's early and their sixes are erupting in the space of the E's, so the fives are impacted, like basic things. I think that's an amazing point. Yeah, that's really, really good. I would love to hear like maybe step by step of your journey because you're doing a lot. Like a lot is happening here. So what was the first step? And just tell us like one step after another. What have you had done so far and where is this journey gonna go next?
Got it. Yeah, so like just kind of rewind 20 years.
Okay.
Basically had my jaw broken playing hockey, wired shut for 6 weeks. And I think they didn't have me do PT after the fact. I literally was just 30, young, healthy. They're like, yep, you're good. And then I think they put clear aligners on my bite because my teeth had shifted over the 6 weeks, my jaw was wired shut. And they did the clear aligners and then they're like, yeah, you're
Okay,
good.
so they were
That's
trying to realign your teeth or they were just retaining them in the new position? What
yeah.
were they
So
trying to?
basically, I had one of those internal retainers
Okay. The wire.
from, and then I had my jaw broken. It was wired shut for 6 weeks. And then because my teeth shifted over the 6 weeks, they kind of used some clear aligners, move things.
To move things. Okay.
And then I was like good to go. But there was no PT. And I look back and I'm thinking like one of the most crazy things I've learned from like Dr. Dwight Jennings in Oakland, he's like probably one of the best TMJ docs in the world, is that I think like our teeth, like upper and lower jaw, kind of represent like where our neurological neutral is for our brain, right? Like our teeth are an extension of our brain. And if we have some kind of traumatic response, and whether call it whiplash, call it, an accident in sport, call it a fall downstairs, and all of a sudden our neutral shifts. I think it's one of those things where our brain is constantly, it built all this code based off of where we thought neutral used to be. And now neutral has shifted. And I think our brain is like, what are you doing?
That's
And for myself, I think I was 30, super healthy and fit. So I don't think it affected me for a long time, but it was this constant. And I think it started to catch up to me after a few years. And
yeah.
so getting back to your original question, like it started as I just felt like this sensory slash brain fog effect. In this is where I basically went and got an MRI. And of course, they're like, dude, you're healthy, you're fit, there's nothing wrong with you. And then I chased every known doctor in the world of regular medicine. And then I also went the route of functional medicine, chasing some amazing docs. And then this is where actually, I don't know if you're familiar, he's out of Carlsbad, Dr. Datis Karazian. I know he's one of the best funk med docs that teaches a lot of other docs. And I remember he put me in I was one of his two case studies for a seminar I did with 1,000 doctors back in 2019. And he gave me access to all these doctors for an entire year in a Facebook group. And it's crazy for me to still think now that no one ever talked to me about airway and sleep.
Mm.
It was supplements, mold, all these things. And then this is where, for myself, I randomly had a client referred to me. This woman had done PT. She had torn her ACL, and she was an older woman in her 50s. And basically, she wanted to go from PT back to, she was a head coach for women's tennis at a high school here. So she needed some training. And then back in the summer 19, we started working together in my gym. And this is where she was like, yeah, like I had randomly listened to this podcast with Stephen Lynn about like how our airway affects our long-term health and the degradation of it. And there was just something about the podcast that was like, wow, that like really hit hard.
Mhm.
And then same week of my life, like call it a sign, whatever, this woman comes in and she's like, oh, my husband's been a functional dentist for 30 years. You should come talk to my husband. And then this is where probably summer 2019, I started my whole airway journey because I had chased all these other things. And right around that time, this is where Dr. Karazi and I had done his seminar. And he basically thought that everything I was experiencing was a result of CTE relative to the trauma I had to my head and my jaw. And this is why I had this constant degradation from just basically like the glial cells in my brain and all this stuff. And this is where I started the airway. And this is where I started with like the Vivos in 2019. And I basically did that for about 20 months.
Tell us how it works.
So to give people,
Tell us how the
yeah,
use
so
works.
I actually got it right here for you.
Ah, amazing.
So there's an upper lower appliance.
Okay.
And basically it's kind of got like the upper tends to have like two screws in it, and the lower has like a single screw.
Okay.
And it's kind of like a can opener, right? Like obviously for the lower jaw, it like starts to expand, but basically the springs basically are supposed to sit on the basically palate and activate stem cells to basically give you growth that you basically never had and should have had, kind of thing.
Are there any
And
forces on the teeth, or is it just palatal expansion and then like that stimulus on this?
so as far as this goes, it is when you say forces on the teeth, like do you feel it, or
Are we
is it?
moving teeth, or are we just working on the palate and the actual jaw expansion?
So with this, it kind of sits on the, like on the stem cell, like on the palate itself and like on the gums. And this is where it
Okay.
kind of activates from the jaw perspective of expansion. And this is where I think it was interesting, like all that I've read about it and just different philosophies of like how much of it is like, is it really expanding? Is it just alveolar growth? Like, what are people getting with this?
Mhm.
And this is the part of me that, like, kind of going back, like this, I feel like this helped me not need MMA surgery
Okay.
because right around the end of my 20 months of using this, my upper jaw was at 28 millimeters. It went to 31. And then my lower was at 31 and it went to like 35 from an expansion perspective.
Just
And I
with the
think the biggest,
Vivos. That's just with
yeah,
the
just with the
Vivos.
Vivos. And this is where, like, I've read a lot of Dr. Singh's work and I've all the stuff for all these different devices and how much of it is actual growth for the bone and how much of it is just tipping of the teeth. And this is
Okay.
where
Okay.
there's a lot out there. There's a lot of claims, this and that. And I mean, the one thing that I've learned with my own story is like, if I'm an adult chasing palate expansion, I'm going to have someone split my midline suture and I'm going to try to literally do like an MSC MARPE from an optimal expansion.
All right. So just to clarify that point around you not being sure where that expansion came from, where that increase in width came from, what you're saying, because I'm aware that people who are not in this field will be listening to this and be like, what? Like, what is he talking about? What is the confusion here? So it's like what you're saying is it may not actually be palatal expansion. It may be that the teeth tipped out, therefore creating this illusion of more space. Now, I don't know much about these appliances. They're all very new to me, which is why I'm so curious as to your kind of embodied lived experience with them. So I'm not saying that they're terrible or they're amazing. I'm just curious. And I guess you've had them in your mouth and you've experienced them. Did you experience any health benefits or upgrades or differences or downgrades even during your Vivos uh time?
I guess, you know what? Like, I really didn't. I guess what it did was teed up my curiosity for the world of Airway.
Mm.
I spent enough money and time, and then it's like it kind of pulled me in, and it was like, okay. Like for instance, by the end of the screw on my upper appliance, here's my doctor telling me you're good to go. Okay. You've run the end of the screw. And then I'm thinking, I just met with probably one of the best UARS doctors in New York City. He actually went to my surgeon appointment with me there. And literally, here's the facial surgeon telling me, yeah, dude, you got a jaw of like a 5 or 6 year old.
Mm.
And then I'm thinking to myself, he told me that basically the Vivos he thinks gave me a little bit of development in the back of my throat because he was thinking I was going to be a candidate for MMA and basically said like the pharyngeal airway, basically the space in the back behind your throat. He's like, I feel like it gave you enough width back there that you might just be able to do palate expansion like a Sarpy and be good to go from this point moving forward. And so I feel like, you I think people always want to go back and like wish they just did it knowing what they know today and making no mistakes, but I feel like it created this opportunity for me to come in from a different angle than I would come at this today. And just, it forced me to have to look for other solutions. And I think part of that has led me to where I am today, the understanding I have and the fire I have for just trying to help people not make mistakes that a lot of people make because they just don't know any better. And I think part of that for me was starting in a place where someone has education for a lot of different things and then possibly teeing up a better solution based on all those solutions that exist. Because I think in Airway, there are certain doctors that they just don't know what they don't know. So then it's just like they're not going to tee something up for you that's better because they don't even know it's on the table. They've never seen it. And I think that's just the case. I've seen that some of these best doctors, they learn what they learn in school, their families, they're busy. They don't have time to be learning about all this stuff that's going on. So I think a lot of times they're just unaware that there's these other things going on. And then as a result, it's not a part of their practice. It's not something they refer out. Yet that doesn't mean it's not a great solution for a lot of their clients. They're just unaware.
Yeah.
And so me doing the Vivos just kind of opened that door for just seeing the route that maybe a lot of people might be put in. And then if they are, what are they getting? What are they not getting? And for myself, I will speak to this. I think a lot of people that are in the same boat as me, that they've been mouth breathers their whole life since early on, that they have severely underdeveloped maxillas and their nasal cavity is super small. A lot of these people are in dire need of bigger plumbing.
Mhm.
And if I want bigger plumbing, one of the best ways from a expansion perspective is for someone to split the midline in basically the left and right side of the upper jaw and to add width. And what I've seen is these heavy duty expanders that there's 5, 10 people in the US that I'm aware of that do an amazing job. And what that really does is just it changes the mark for how someone breathes and sleeps for the rest of their lives. Because how you expand matters, but it's more of like how your pipes in the back of your nose expand is the most important thing. Because at the end of the day, it's all about just flow. And that's going to be the openings in the back of your nose. And not all expanders create the same change in flow. And this is where understanding which ones create the most. And if you're going to go for it, why not try to get the most bang for your buck for the rest of your life?
All right. So let's rewind a little bit. So you did the Vivos and then you went to directly into like MAPI and all of that stuff, or was there something in between?
So I started the Vivos, and this is where I had multiple sleep tests
Okay.
in Arizona. I did 2 at home, 1 in a lab, and I tried a CPAP, and I just felt like it didn't really do anything. And then I was probably like 16, 17 months into the Vivos, and this is where I was like, there's just something that's like it's not right. Like I still don't feel any benefit of doing this. And then this is where Dr. Avram Gold out of Stony Brook, New York, he's been in the sleep medicine game for over 40 years. And I just read a ton of research. I had heard him on a Stephen Park podcast with talking about UARS, and I'd never heard about that before. And what was interesting was Dr. Stephen Park was asking him all these questions that you could just tell he didn't know what Dr. Gold was talking about, which is funny because literally a year later, Dr. Park's book literally talks about half of it is about UARS, which I thought was pretty interesting. So anyway, I set up a consult with Dr. Gold in New York, just telemed. And then this is where I literally had kind of decided to go see him.
Okay.
And right around this time, I think it was probably 4 or 5 months before Dr. Gold, actually, that's when I had tonsils, adenoids, deviated septum, and my nasal valve all adjusted from a surgical intervention.
So
And
tonsils and
what's,
adenoids removed or
yes, yes,
fine?
removed. And then what happened with that was actually, it took me a few months to recover. For 3 months, I felt really good. And
Okay.
then in March, allergy season kind of came back. And this is where, for me, it was like I went back to square one. And then this is when I had kind of reached out to Dr. Gold because it was like, I had been doing the Vivos. I had basically done the tonsils, adenoids, deviated septum, and I was thinking, all right, maybe this is it. And then this is where, after the allergies came back, I realized, like, okay, there's still a problem, but I
Mm.
didn't really know what else to do. But then I didn't really understand palate expansion the way I do today, from a basically nasal pipe situation. And then that's when I flew out to sleep in Dr. Gold's lab for 2 nights. And then it was really cool because he basically went to my surgeon's appointment with me. And at first I was like, I've never heard of this thing called a Sarpy.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then I was like, all right, am I going to have to fly to New York to get this done? And then that's when I flew home to Arizona and I started looking to see what I could find locally. And I ended up finding a really good place called Frost Orthodontics, about 30 minutes from my house. And about 60% of their practice is focused on expansion in adults. And then that's when I actually did the Sarpy.
Okay. So explain what the SAPI is, because we know the definition. So just for those who
Yeah.
are like, what is he talking about? So tell us a little bit about what it is, what it stands for, etc.
Yeah. So Sarpy is a surgically assisted rapid palate expansion.
Yes. Yeah.
And basically, what they end up doing is, if you take your upper palate, yeah,
Oh,
there's basically your left side, right side. They're basically going to go in and surgically cut down the middle. So what they do is they fit you for an expander. So mine was tooth-borne. So a tooth-borne expander will literally sit over your back teeth, and they make all different kinds with different size arms. So what they end up doing is they end up making two cuts. So you basically go in, you get your braces on, they fit you for expander, and then the day of surgery, they basically go in, they cut here down the mid palatal suture, and then they'll tend to hit the zygomatic arch here. And then what ends up happening is you get more of a conical expansion. So when you talk about like the palate, how it tends to basically expand from like a Pac-Man style, where more in the front of the palate like this, less in the back.
Okay.
And so this is where you kind of start to getting into the different distinctions of different kinds of expansion. But some of them will put it over two teeth. There's also what's very similar to a Sarpy. It's like a dome. So what they actually do is it's tooth-borne and bone-borne. So they'll actually screw it in as well. And what you end up getting is more integrity to the device itself. So when you talk about like asymmetries and just wanting to keep things more precise, less room for error, it's obviously the more integrity you add from screws, tads, arms, the better chance you have of just kind of controlling the narrative to how expansion occurs.
And so you had the SARPy experience. Did you feel a difference? Like what? Because you're gonna
Hell
end up with
yeah.
a diastomer as well, right? So if
Oh, yeah.
they're, yeah, you're gonna end up with a big diastomer, which I think for a lot of people will be like they'll feel put off by that depending on where they are in life and what's coming up for
Yeah.
them. Um, So the question is, did you feel a difference in terms of the way you felt and your health? And did you see a difference, and how did you feel about seeing that difference, like the visual differences? Because I expect that transition maybe wasn't as aesthetically pleasing as some other methods.
Yeah, it's like I think two things to that. So one, when you're suffering so bad every day that you're considering quitting your job and possibly ending your life, you're not worried about what you look like.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's
I think
really,
that's huge. And I think there's a lot of people that are on that side of the coin of like, I don't know how I'm going to go on in life if I keep feeling like this because I can barely get through my day. I think that's part. And then I think the other side of it is with doing the expansion, like literally the day of, I felt a difference.
mm,
So oftentimes what they'll do is they'll take the expander and maybe they split the suture and they'll maybe open the expander 5 millimeters on the day of surgery just to make sure that like there's basically everything's moving properly. And then what they'll do is rewind it to maybe like 1 to 2 millimeters. So when you come out of surgery, you already have expansion.
right.
So for myself, it was like literally that day, I was like, wow, I
I
could
can see.
already feel a
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah.
Like day one, I was like, no, it's more like someone put a fan on your face because you're like,
Yeah.
because it was like just even that small difference was like, for a pallet that's 30 millimeters for you to expand like two, it's like, all right, like there's already like a difference.
Mm,
And then I think for myself, after a few weeks of just the basically the inflammation and everything going down, um, I'd say by a month or two, it was like dramatic as far as airflow coming into my nose. And then I had my expander in for about 10 months just to add some, because the expander kind of acts like a cast once you're done expanding and you need to let the bone heal. And obviously, with it being your jaw versus an arm, they like to make sure that you're good to go. So for a lot of people, it'll be 3 to 6 months where you keep the expander in when you're done. So a lot of the expansion is done early and then it's kind of they keep the expander in. And then with a Sarpy, what they end up doing is they do braces and they started using the braces up top and the expander in to start to get the lower teeth to basically tip out to accommodate the bite. Because obviously you can't just expand up top and then like expect your teeth to fit.
yeah.
And then I think once there's enough healing up top and there's the stability there to work off of, they use that stable base to start to get the lower teeth to accommodate and eventually kind of start to move things.
Mm,
And for myself, this is where I started the Sarpy. I was 31 millimeters. And then at the end, I was 42. So
that's
my
a lot.
airway doubled. It's like I'll watch videos of myself and I can't really remember what it's like to not breathe through my mouth. Like my whole life, I was a mouth breather. And now I'm like, God, I breathe so good. I can't remember, but I just could never breathe my entire life.
Oh, yeah, that would have been a lot. That would have been hard. Okay, so that was like, wow, this worked for you, and you felt the immediate impact and benefits of that. What was then the next step? So you were loving it. You increased from 31 to 42. Where
Yeah,
did you
yeah.
go from there?
So now you have the upgraded mechanics, but I had a posterior tongue tie my entire life,
Okay.
which is why my palate didn't develop. So then I had been doing myofunctional therapy for about 6 months with a woman, and I still couldn't figure out why I couldn't make the caves movement where I could get my tongue up on my palate.
Mm,
And so this is where I started doing some research online, was watching a really good it's 5 dimensions of tongue tie with the Breathe Institute with Dr. Zaghi, who I think is probably the best in the world at bringing awareness and educating the importance and the different distinctions in tongue ties.
mhm,
Um, and so I actually worked with Leslie, who basically teaches a bunch of courses for them. online for about 6 weeks. I had done Zoggy, which is cool, does a 15-minute Skype consult. And this is where I had done the consult, so I didn't need to fly out there. I had sent him all my case information.
Yeah.
And that's when he was like, hey, why don't you work with one of our people online? And then if at the end of that, you still want to come out here, let's just do your tongue tire. And so I think this is probably like 7 months after I had got my expander out. I had been doing the myo. I still had my braces on and stuff. And then this is where I basically flew out one morning, had my tongue tie released, and flew back the same day. And that was something where, okay, now I had the upgraded mechanics. And then now it was like, okay, I need my tongue to be able to reach the roof of my mouth, which it did. And so that was just crazy. I remember like 2 days later sitting at a light, and all of a sudden, first time in my life, I could feel like the back of my tongue up on my palate. And I was like, wow. It was like to just feel pressure in my oral cavity, which never.
Yeah. So I find it very, very interesting that you'd done quite a lot of interventions research, seen quite a few people prior to that point, and no one had pointed out to you your posterior tongue tie or suggested that that might be, okay. So it was kind of overlooked. Whoops, that's not good.
I did have about 40 doctors in my life laugh about the fact that I was a mouth breather, dentists, doctors. And you're like, yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna contribute to it. Okay.
That's a metabolic issue and you guys aren't talking to me about it. Got it.
Yeah. I think that what that makes me think of is, you've seen some incredible, intelligent, really well-trained people along this journey, and maybe there's more to this journey, which we'll get back to. And all of them were advocating for the thing that they were well-trained and well-educated and well-researched in. And so I guess that sometimes like it's a blessing, and it's like amazing that we can, each expert can offer their thing. The SARPy guy can offer the SARPy, and the MARPy guy can offer the MARPy, and whoever else can offer whatever else. But sometimes when you're so amazing at one thing, you don't see the very simple other thing of like, hey, he's got posterior tongue tie. Like, that's literally so simple. And I think, for any patients, clients, curious kittens, whoever, like whoever is watching this, like remembering that sometimes you do need a whole team, and sometimes you need to follow your own instinct and intuition and do your own research. And sometimes you can't expect one person to know everything, because it's impossible. It's overwhelming. And I mean, all of this stuff is completely outside of dentistry in the UK. Like you are not taught any of these things. You have to be curious enough to go learn about it. It's all backward orthodontics. It's extraction orthodontics, with, they take teeth out and pull everything back. I had 2 upper premolars out at the age of 10, pulled back, right? And it relapses, and you get a narrow palate and all of those things. So as you said earlier, you don't know what you don't know. And so no matter how specialized or how much of a genius a person is, they are going to be a genius in their thing. And we also need to remember that hopefully they'll be curious enough to look at the full picture and send you to the right person for the different aspects of the care that's required. But that is just a huge example of, like, no matter how smart you are, you can miss the simplest of things if you're only thinking about your own expertise. Just like, yeah, that's a really, really good example of that. Wow. So then you got your tongue tie released, and you could finally, bring your tongue to your palate. So what happened next? This is a tale of transformation, guys. It fits the title.
We're just getting started. No. And then, so think of this, right? Like, your tongue serves as basically the floor to your tent, which is your nose. Well, if your tongue never sat on your palate, your nose was always collapsed. This is where like the high arch palate tends to be like the basically the roof of your mouth starts to infringe on that nasal cavity because it's supposed to be like this and your palate is high arched. You don't have width in your palate, so the base of your nose, everything gets skinny versus getting that width outside.
Yeah.
So this is where a resource for your clients, like I think she's one of the best in the US, Dr. Karen Parker Davidson. She is the nose is her. And so her background is Airway and just all the diagnostics and testing. And so for her, she started to kind of help me out just talking about when I started posting stuff about my sleep doctor stuff. We started having conversations. She was just curious about different things. And then this is where she kind of talked to me about just some of the smaller aspects like nasal valve. And it's like, well, if your tongue has never been on your palate, it's like the structure itself from the tent just being collapsed your whole life tends not to function properly. And then it's kind of like from a physics perspective, I understand this from my job is that, fluids can't move if structures aren't working properly due to integrity. So then she talked to me about restoring the nasal valve after actually getting my tongue up on my palate. And then this is where I looked into that. And I actually flew out to Dallas. So Dr. Keith Matheny, awesome ENT, works with some of the Dallas Cowboys. And he did the procedure called the Vivere, which basically you use like a resonance wand that heats up and it kind of remodels the structure of your nose. It's kind of like almost like banging out dents in a car. So it like remodels, and it was literally in and out of his office in an hour. The majority of the procedure is actually spent numbing your nose, and then he uses this wand that heats up, and he basically holds different spots in your nose. And he said roughly it'll last 5-6 years, but it basically restores the integrity of your nasal valve, which, as Karen says, the first 3 centimeters of your nose is responsible for about 70% of your nasal resistance. So if the integrity isn't there, oftentimes we're not going to experience the differential in pressure to allow our nose to work the way it's meant to. And then that changes how we breathe, not because we lack the mechanics, but the physics are going to affect how the flow is experienced. And then this is why it's so important for people after all this stuff to make sure they're checking boxes so that they get to experience the truest effect of any of the upgrades they've experienced.
Right. Okay. So that was your next step after the posterior tongue tie release.
Yep.
And so then again, did you feel it? Did you feel the difference?
Dramatic. So it's kind of one of those things. Once again, it was like a weird, I don't know how to explain. It was like, your nose from the procedure got crusty and stuffy.
Okay.
But it was like I could almost tell I could breathe better, even though I was stuffy in my nose for a few weeks. And then a few weeks later, this is where I'd kind of been playing around with Karen had talked to me about. This is a really cool device. It's called a PNIF, PNIF, that you can.
Yeah.
And what it does is kind of measure your resistance in your nose.
Okay.
So it was interesting to see that in a matter of a few weeks, I think it was like usually 90, 95 prior to the nasal valve. And then literally I was like a $140, 145 a month later. And nothing had changed except for the fact that like it allowed my nose to functionally work better.
Right. And did it change the external appearance, or was it very much an internal? Yeah. So
Yeah, it's kind of one of those. The one thing I've seen with this is like you could put a little kid that's been expanded with a 45 or 40 millimeter jaw next to a big guy that's got 35 and they're a mouth breather. And you would never guess that the airway of the little kid is bigger than the big guy. It's like, I feel like you just can't see airway and function. I think you've obviously got big rugby players and NFL football players that you can just tell they have massive jaws, and you're like, yeah, that guy breathes really good.
Mm. Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think for a lot of people, I think visually it's kind of hard to tell. I think the biggest thing you can tell is if someone has really good width to their openings in their nose, and you can see that, like, but I think the majority of humans today, you can look in small, tiny openings.
Like
You can
me.
tell there's a collapsed side for sure. You're like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what happened next? So you did that, and then
okay. So then
oh,
this
let me
is
just pause you there. Let me just pause you there.
okay.
All this time you've got fixed appliances on this whole journey so far. You've had the fixed braces, or
So I had, yes, so I still had my braces on at that time.
okay,
And then a few months later, that was kind of where I got to this place of like, I can breathe amazing. Like I feel like it, but I was like, I still have a dramatic amount of fatigue.
okay,
And then this is where, for the first time in my life, so in my field, it's called Postural Restoration Institute, where this guy, Ron Haraska, he's out of Nebraska, started this about 30 years ago. And it's really about like airway and function and breathing and mechanics of the body. And I would say the best physical therapists in what I do, from sport and human function, take into account all of this work. And he talks, a lot of this stuff goes back to airway and the neurological side, to like the neural rhythms of breathing and mental and like basically cognition. And then this goes back to where I started, where I think even your best, or what you had said, most of your best orthos surgeons, they're great at straightening the teeth, but they don't account for restoring balance to the system. And by the system, I mean, you've basically got, if I take the three corners of a triangle, you've got your occlusion, your TMJ joints, and your upper cervical. And the three should almost be balanced like 3 points of a scale. And when those three are balanced, what it does is allow your body to experience gravity its truest sense. Because what ends up happening is a lot of orthodontists will just straighten your teeth at cost of robbing you function from a cervical TMJ perspective. They just don't know.
yeah,
Once again, this is where I've learned TMJ docs that basically they're neuromuscular dentists, and they're trained to look at the system and the oral cavity from a muscular standpoint and a balance standpoint, look at the jaw from this lens. But what tends to happen is, a typical orthodontist might straighten your teeth, but then you lose function of your TMJ joints, meaning you could have a cant where
yeah.
your one side of your jaw is stuck, and you're stuck for the rest of your life.
Mm.
Which means if you've had some kind of head trauma or this and that, like you're locked in that pattern. And how you experience gravity from this system being balanced is how you posture for the rest of your life. It's how you see for the rest of your life. And if you're locked into a dysfunctional pattern that you've lived into, your neurological system is stuck. And this is where I realized, like, I took my braces off early after my expansion. And this is where I went to actually work with one of the best TMJ docs in the country, Dr. Rahman, in Kansas City.
I think I've seen some of the stuff that you were doing with him, like some videos. Yeah, so you did the tongue tie, you did the internal remodeling. What came next?
So I am 6 months into the treatment with Dr. Rahman.
Okay, and explain, tell us what you're doing with him.
So in essence, what he does is like a good neuromuscular doc that looks at this from a neuromuscular perspective will tend to evaluate your system and see where your occlusion would be in space to allow everything to be balanced. And so what they end up doing is they have a way to test for that. And then they create like this orthodontic that basically sits over your lower teeth. So in essence, it figures out like where your lower teeth would be from a vertical height from in space. And then what they end up doing is he bonds the basically fixed orthotic for roughly 3 or 4 months. And it's kind of like his working hypothesis for where he would put your bite in order to give you this freedom and balance to your system.
Okay, let me pause you there. So this fixed orthotic, it's replicating a vertical, assumption, an assumption of the new vertical dimensions. It's not doing anything kind of horizontally or anything like that. It's just adding height. And he's assuming that you're going to over erupt into that height, or like your teeth are
So
going
this is where it will accommodate, because when he accounts for the vertical height, right? Like he realizes that the muscles are going to relax and then the jaw is going to move. So then there's going to be the other aspects from a three-dimensional perspective that need to be accounted for. And this is where he can actually kind of test that and continue to kind of fine tune it as it goes from the lower jaw. And this is where, if there's success with that, he can then, you have 3 options. You can basically use a splint for the rest of your life. He can actually use braces to move your actual teeth to that place, or he can do a porcelain finish. And there's some doctors out there that actually do buildups on the teeth, depending on like the person or the case. And so I've found that like from all the research, like 70-80% of people, if they're mouth breathers and have like a deep bite and clench, a lot of these people, what end up happening is their lower arch never fully erupted. So therefore they lack vertical height to their jaw. And this is where he'll actually, I'm 2 months into the process now. He's uprighting my teeth first, but then he uses braces to stimulate basically force production to get my actual teeth to grow to the height of the orthotic.
So he's extruding the teeth. He's like, yeah,
yes.
Okay. Interesting. So the other option, so it was either extrude the teeth, add height through direct or indirect restoration, so like a cap or actual filling material, or to wear a lifelong splint, like day and night.
Yep. Day and night.
Okay.
So it's interesting, like literally before we talked today, like I had someone from a doctor that literally they didn't do the bonded. Their doctor doesn't do the bonded orthotics, so they do a removable, but they were just talking about how crappy it was to kind of eat with it in. And I thought people might have actually taken it out if they have the removable.
That's what I thought. They didn't take it out. They have to just keep it in.
No, but they were just said they could feel it like move up and down when they're doing that. And that was one of the things why I went to see Dr. Rahman, because a lot of people create a removable. And I realized you get one chance to put this thing in the right way when you're doing it. But I think from a long-term stability, from like a cast on the body for like a neurological perspective, and then the fact that it's stable and he uses it for the 2 or 3 years if you do the braces. Like right now, it's actually in my mouth. And then the braces will go over this and he'll use it as part of the treatment. So it's something that gets used for the 2 to 3 years of treatment relative to what he's going to do anyway. But that was part of me that's just like, all right, long-term, like what is the best solution for myself and how to go about this? And then it was just being aware of the science for people that did it the different ways, and then kind of just the distinctions that matter. And that's why I kind of decided to go to see him.
So this is like like so many specialists, so many people. You've literally gone through a massive journey. So from now on, you're sticking with Dr. Raman. He's your guy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's my guy.
he's your guy. And do you think you're in the last phase of this journey now? Are you feeling like it's coming to an end in the next few years?
So I know I have like another 2 years with this. It's kind of more of a, I guess it's always being open to whatever maybe it presents itself. Like, and I think for some people, they might be like, all right, like I just want this to be done so I can go on with my life. And I just feel like life is about getting to the finish line and still having your spirit and your soul, and owning a gym where I train a lot of wealthy people that they're just not happy and they have everything because a lot of them have lost their health along the way. It's just realizing that for myself, like health is this forever thing. And if it's like, if everything I can do from some perspective is going to help the back end of my life, like by doing it today, it's like just being open to that. And I think part of me has been like this curiosity to this whole world. I love to tinker at heart. Like I am a engineer, an architect. I like to, there's nothing better to experiment on than yourself. And you never know unless you do stuff. So I think part of me has been, where's this science going to take me? Who am I going to meet? What am I going to learn? How is it going to change me? Like having that attitude and then realizing for myself, like, it's not like I'm just trying this because like I felt like, oh, like there's more stuff to try. Like this was literally like, this is a $50,000. I'm flying across the country once a month, like not exactly convenient, but I realized there was still, after all this stuff, there was still something wrong. And this is where it was like to, based on everything that I've read, I was like, all right, my gut just tells me there's something here. And to me, this is where I think the craziest component for long-term health exists, especially for old people, in what I'm doing today. Because I literally feel like 6 months ago, someone put a hanger on my body, and I literally feel like posturally, your body just contorts over time relative to how you experience gravity, your jaw, that stuff. And I feel like I am getting taller and my body is realigning every single day. And I think it's kind of like the brain has to work harder the more it has to compensate. And as we live into bad compensations as we age, I think a lot of what robs people is the neurological effort at just trying to make it all work. And if we lack structural function as we age because we didn't do what was necessary earlier on, it's like we're left really compensating. And I can't help but wonder how much of aging is these people that grinded down their teeth, they've grinded down their cervical vertebrae. It's like all these things have been worn down, and now the brain has to work so hard just to do life because there's just a lot of bad intel being fed into the brain every day.
That's an interesting point. So yeah, so the having a less than ideal structure, mechanics, symmetry, everything fitting together as it should puts a strain and a compensation in particular points. So you're going to wear away those areas. And then, of course, we do know that the brain receives a lot of stimulus from the teeth, the mouth, and it's a two-way communication system. And so if that is wearing away and that is aging because it's not structurally in the right place, then the way your brain is receiving and giving information from that is going to be reflective of that degeneration. And then, of course, you're going to get, well, I would assume that you might get that cognitive decline that comes with aging, but does it have to, is the question. You never did the MAPI? You did the SAPI, but you never did the MAPI? We didn't.
So this is, yeah. So once again, this is me not knowing what I know today. Like
Yeah.
if I woke up 5 years ago today and I'm like, yep, we're doing a Marpy, I can tell you who I'm going to see.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
But it was like I was unaware at that point because, there's the one thing I've seen with Marpy at this point is just better posterior expansion of the nasal cavity.
Okay.
And so the science there, whether you do an ease procedure or you just do a custom Marpy, let's just say we're splitting hairs here. Those are like the two best things from I've read pretty much every doctor in the world. And from a posterior nasal expansion and better airflow through the nose for an adult, that the science says those are the best options.
Okay. Okay, wow. So your story, like you describe, you were not feeling good. You needed, so something had to be done in order for you to feel like you could just breathe or not feel intensely fatigued or not feel like it was obviously something that you were so aware of or was making itself very known to you, something in your body, something in your energy was making itself known to you that you were compelled, like it was almost like your destiny to walk this path and to go through all of these interventions and now become very knowledgeable on all of these different interventions and be able to make your own assessment for you in your own body of what worked and what didn't. I would say, I mean, to anyone listening, and this you can disagree or agree that maybe this is not the path for everybody. It's a lot, and it's not necessarily, I mean, it's a lot. It's not going to be for everybody, and everybody's treatment aims and what they're hoping to achieve will be slightly different. And maybe some people need something a lot more subtle, and maybe those who have experienced a level of kind of health or lack of health in the way that you did, where you felt so down, then this would be something interesting to consider. But of course, the exact path you took won't be appropriate because we're all so different. We're so individual and we're so unique. And, X, number of millimeter expansion on this person may not be what this person needs. How do you test that? Because when I was talking to Dr. Jalal Khan, I loved his commitment to having every little bit, every movement, every adjustment tested. So he works alongside a craniosacral osteopath, and he's like, we need to check that everything is still happy with every movement and shift that we make. And I love that because I don't think we can have these random numbers of like 38 millimeters, 51, whatever, let's pick a number out of the air. I don't think we can do that like as a blanket rule because we are so different and some people need something very subtle and that's just enough for them. Maybe it's me because I'm super cautious and I'm like, let's go small, let's go gentle. But how were you testing that your cranial bones were happy, that everything is happy, or were you going by how you feel?
I went with how I feel, but I guess there's two really good ways to test. And it's crazy to me that it's like the orthodontists that are the best at expansion, they just don't post pre and post data from the breathing side. But I feel like that would really give people perspective between treatments, age related, sex related, like data. Because at the end of the day, like you said, yeah, like it doesn't really matter because you could have the smallest airway in the world and every doctor should be like, yeah, you should do something. But it's like, if you wake up feeling great, who cares?
Yes. Yeah.
You're just chasing madness. If you feel good subjectively, who cares?
Yeah.
Unless you have like cancer in your body and you're not treating it and you're aware, like, so I think it's called four-phase rhinomanometry. It's a device like ENT dentists have, but they can measure flow.
Yeah.
So for someone doing pre and post, that's huge. And then there's the cranial sacral version of testing, which you can use like a K7 like jaw tracker where you can put leads on the muscles. Because the other side of it is like if I'm sitting here with my mouth closed at rest, the muscles in my face should reflect that. And if they're not, we realize we have an issue. Like, I mean, I have a 25-year-old girl. I went down to Tucson with one of my clients. This woman in Tucson trained under my doctor in Kansas City, and she has like TMJ issues. And so, anyway, she did all this testing, and there was a simple like tap, tap, hold on a light clench. And on her right side, it was like a 900% differential to her left side on a simple thing. And she's like a PhD student. And all of a sudden, from a data perspective, she was like, whoa, I don't know anything about dentistry, but that's not good.
Yeah.
But I think we have the ability to quantify these things because, and I don't understand why doctors don't, because we could create some healthy norms for, we measured kids at different ages, and then we also measured the kids at certain widths to look at their ability to breathe from like a flow perspective. We could start to have some windows into like what is a healthy norm for a kid with a good size airway versus not. And then it becomes at least some data that other doctors can work off of to try to assess whether someone breathes pretty well or not.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I think just throughout this whole conversation, you've evidenced that through your journey, there are ways to measure everything. So if someone wanted to measure, to test, to assess their function, to assess what's going on before they made a decision, and to assess whether a decision has made an impact and what kind of impact, then there are ways to test for it. The problem is it's not readily available, at least not in the UK. Have many of the things you've mentioned I've never heard of, and I'm just having a very open, curious conversation. Some aspects of it are like I have to read more about. So I'm really grateful to you for introducing some of these ideas to me. And isn't that wild? Like, I've been a dentist for 12 years, and some of these things I've never heard of. And that is the system that we work in, that is the education that we're given. And so, like you said, we don't know what we don't know. But, you know, we're not going to know whether to reject it or to accept it, and whether to include it in our own practice until we go, hey, I don't know much about this. I've now heard about it. Let me go read about it. But I think what happens often is like the immediate rejection, which is not what we want, because then we're not going to develop our practice, or refine some of the things that are happening out there, or create a more cohesive system where we know who to send where, you know, who's got the right skills for each little piece of the journey. What I'm feeling, you know, what's coming through for me is like the MAPI and the SAPI aren't for everyone. For me, from what you're describing, it's for more extreme cases, or more challenging cases, or people who are actually feeling unwell, who feeling like they can't breathe very well, or feeling that. Would you feel like your threshold for it is a bit lower, like that you would offer it out or suggest it for everybody? Or because I certainly wouldn't. I'm like, wow, that's a lot. I can see how it's really helped you. I can see how it would help a cohort of people, but it's not the first thing I would grab. But again, I'm very cautious. I'm cautious, and I'm very mindful about the experience of the patient. So like, what is this light shift feeling like? What is this light shift feeling like? And going slowly. So yeah, where's your threshold with that?
I guess I would say this. The hardest way to, I guess, answering that question is I work with people of all ages, pro athletes to older people. And I think most people always just touch on the low hanging fruit. And then they say, well, I'll do that when it gets bad. Only life gets busier and things get worse, and it's never convenient. And then I feel like health stuff spider webs. And this is where I see at least 50% of people, their soul is lost in their 60s because they've lost their lust for life because health has spider webs so bad. And I think it's because of all these little deals that they made along the way that they were unwilling to maybe do something a little bit more
Yeah.
intervention wise. And then as a result, it adds up and it's the back end. So it's like I understand of like, but I'm someone that's always thinking like, let's talk about what's going to happen this week. And then I also want to be concerned about like the back end of my life. And then also seeing people every day. It's like to see the 1% of people that are like 60 or 70 years old and these guys crush it. And then to see most 70-year-olds that can't get down on the floor or can't get up without using their hands versus someone that moves really well and their energy. I guess the hardest thing is, if we're not doing some of these things that kind of really move the marker versus we're always picking low-hanging fruit, like where is it going to impact my life? And then at some point, is it like, well, I can never get the quality of life back the way I could have if I would have done these things. And that's just how I look at health because I see it every day and I have my entire life. And there's nothing worse than having older people like my parents that you love to death. And it's like if you could have only gone back to do some of these things, you could help them more today. And then they're standing in front of you and they're suffering and it sucks because you're like, there's not a whole lot you can do. And if stuff would have been done earlier, and I guess that's what makes it hard. So it's like I don't ever have an opinion for other people. It's like if people are happy and they're good with their life, cool. And
Mhm.
I'm one of those people like, well, if I'm going to spend this money anyway, like, how do I get the most bang for my buck? But that tends to be how I live my life from a health choice perspective. And I understand, like, that's definitely not how most people look at it, nor should they. But that's just kind of how I do it.
Yeah, you're committed. You're like all in, all in. It's interesting. Very, very interesting. I guess I should have asked you this earlier, but what have you noticed in terms of like actual function? So you've explained how your airway, you really progressively felt like you could breathe differently, breathe better. You felt like there was a fan in front of your face. So that's one aspect of your experience. What about like your actual athletic function, your ability to move, and also the aesthetics? Have you noticed your face change, and what changes have you noticed?
Yeah, I can definitely see like a semblance of cheeks. It's funny to watch like an older video of me prior to like Sarpy, and I'm like, it's one of those things where you don't think you've changed because you look at the same face every day,
Yeah,
and then you're like,
you
oh
can't tell.
wow, or like your voice or stuff like that. And then I think, yeah, definitely with kind of all this stuff, I'd say from a change perspective, I think about 2 months ago, for the last 5 years, I ended up using Adderall and Xanax to get through my day. So my fatigue was so bad, I was going to quit my job. And I think the biggest thing for me was I started with I was using lots of caffeine to get through my day, but then it was like I couldn't sleep. And so this is where when I made the switch to the Xanax Adderall, it was like, okay, I can at least fall asleep at nighttime. And then I think somewhere along the way of all my stuff, I tried to kind of get off and I felt like I didn't breathe well enough. And so I stayed on it. And so I actually have like 3 days left. I've been off the Adderall for like 2 months and I've got about 3 days left of like a quarter dose of the Xanax. And what's been crazy for me is to actually experience sleep for the first time in my entire life this last few weeks.
Wow.
Um, and so for me, I'll be really curious to see it's like in the next few months of all these pieces coming together because I felt like I could only get like 70% of the way back to health. And something in my gut was like, all right, like it's time to get off the drugs and see how my body kind of moves forward. But like I can feel that like I have the necessary prerequisites to actually sleep and rest at this point. So then it's just like letting my natural kind of everything start to come back and see where that goes. But I think I think that's one of the biggest things is recognizing, like, even I can only imagine for children that are on some of these with sleep issues, breathing issues, is like there's a dramatic difference in my sleep already in the matter of a few weeks from getting off that stuff. And it's almost like just even my deep sleep to be up 10% every single night. And for me, like dream every night. And it's crazy to think that, like, at some point, maybe you're just being held back from all these things. And I mean, the hardest part with any of it, right, is you don't know until you try it. And sometimes it doesn't work and you just got to go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so sleep and cheeks. That's
Sleep and cheeks, sleep and
sleep and
cheeks.
cheeks. That's what's really been kind of the visible, notable, functional differences. And I think, as long as the it's going in the right direction, it sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm going to start wrapping up, but are there any final thoughts or anything that you really want to say, or like that's on your heart, on your mind, that you think that you've forgotten about or didn't mention so far?
Yeah. I think like the number one thing for this is I think people start looking for answers and they're frantically trying to just have it all make sense. And I think with this airway, there's so much to it. And like you said, a lot of the best only know their thing. And I think for people spending some time when they get into this world, possibly reading and learning from a few people and maybe spending a good month or so prior to kind of making decisions, I think just gets rid of that overwhelming sense of like what is going on. Like this person's talking to me about sleep and breathing. And I think it really helps, especially parents that come late to the game, feel like they need to help their kids, like just kind of get some roots and some grounding when it comes to all this stuff to just help them understand like what it is that they're up against as far as helping their child kind of get their health back online. Because it's like you start talking ENT and ortho and cranial sacral therapist and tongue tie and myofunctional therapist and all these doctors, like I've never even heard of these things. And I think it becomes like this overwhelming thing. And I think just being patient with it and realizing like the more you start to dive into it, the more you'll understand. But just trying to get some different perspectives on all this rather than just kind of going to the first doctor that you Google and then hoping for it all to work out. Because, like you said, this requires like a transdisciplinary approach, and our medical system isn't set up in such a way to give people access to the guidance versus if someone was quarterbacking all your health. And I think that's important. And if you're going to end up having to quarterback your kids basically treatment, I think the more you understand, I think the easier it is to kind of help navigate this entire world.
Yeah, yeah. And I think my message and my emphasis would be like, even as people who want to have children, if that's something you're thinking about, really understand our capacity and potential as humans and dual development and things like that, because it's always good to get in there before it happens and set yourself up for it, for nature to do the thing that it knows how to do before we have to do all of these things to correct it. Like, prevent it from happening. Nature knows what to do. We just need to support the system. And as much as it's difficult, which we explained at the start, there are simple things that we can do to at least support our children as much as possible to develop in the way that nature intended. And then the tweaks just get to be small. we don't need to have so much intervention. But what an incredible journey and so interesting. And I'm really curious to watch and see where you go next with it and all of the upgrades, shifts, etc. that you experience. Thank you for sharing. I borrowed an idea from Stephen Bartlett from the Diary of the CEO, where he asks the guest a question from the previous guest. I don't know if you've ever listened to his podcasts, but
Yeah,
the previous guest was Dee Zabara. She's a fertility expert and natural fertility expert, and she has left a
yeah.
question for you. And her question, let me get it, was this whole podcast might be the answer, but maybe you've got something else to share. Her question is, what is the most transformational moment in your life so far?
Ooh. Hmm. Uh, Got it. Yeah. So I think I had a buddy that used to build houses down in Peru. And so I had done a few ayahuasca ceremonies with a shaman that he had worked with. And I think part of me, before I kind of got to this last 5 years, was in this really dark place. And I think when you get to this dark place, you don't know kind of how you got there. You can't recognize what it is. You're just in it and you're drowning and you don't know. And I remember I had this really bad trip where I spent probably 6, 7 hours just looking at the dark side of what drinking did to my health and what my body needed. And I remember like it's been like 6 years almost that like I haven't had a drink, and just
Good.
it was interesting to see that like there was this like intuitive experience that I had that was just teed up for me in a way that your brain would never sit down with yourself. And it was just like calling you on all your stuff. And
Mm.
I walked away from that experience. Like, one has changed as far as like, hey, like that was a really good indicator. Like, you need to like just accept this and move forward without drinking. And then I think it really just showed me this side to healing that I think for myself, prior to all this stuff, I was very traditional. And the more I get into my own healing journey, it's like realizing that these people for thousands and thousands of years have used stuff like plant medicine and how powerful and how beneficial it can be for people in their journey. And I think, for people sometimes, being open to what the world offers you as part of your healing journey, because you never know where it's going to take you.
Mm. Yeah. Wow. I'm so happy for you that you've managed to walk away from drinking and that you've experienced life on the other side of that. That's amazing. That's amazing. And that you've had this healing journey. And I'm sure there's all these other pieces to it, like you've done the plant medicine and all the airway stuff. And I'm sure, there's everyday things that are very healing for all of us, individual little conversations, and someone will say something and just really hits you in the heart in the right place, and that just creates that little shift. So I'm sure you've had so much, so much that's really helped you along your way. And I'm really glad that we got to hear just one aspect of it. And yeah, interested to see where it takes you. What is the question you would love to leave for the next guest?
Mm-mm-mm. Trying to think. God. Uh,
I've put you on the
uh,
spot.
yeah, you did. I was trying to think when you asked, I was like, ooh, where do I go with this? I think, how do we do a better job at helping those that we love bring out like a better version of themselves?
Beautiful. Love that question. How do we do a better job at helping those we love bring out a better version of themselves? That's a really good question. So, yeah, excited to hear whoever it is answer that one and see what they have to say and what advice they have to give. Thank you so much. Thank you for spending all this time with me. We did have a technical difficulty in the middle, guys. So if you see the little jolt in stuff, that's yeah, a little tech issue. but we survived. So thank you so, so, so much.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
All right. See you later. Bye-bye.